introduce a person who is an expert. He's a lawyer, he's an expert on taxes, he's an expert on Bitcoin economy. And please help me welcome Giovanni Méndez.
Good morning. I have the honor to moderate this panel this morning. I'm going to introduce the people who will be joining us. María de Los Ángeles Rivera, a colleague from Kevin Grant Thornton. We have Francisco de Armas from Caribbean Investment and Acquisitions Corp. Adrián Franco from the Federal Reserve and Bank of New York. And we have José Torres from Monllor Capital Partners. So I'm going to let each panelist talk about themselves a little bit and introduce themselves. Regarding this topic, it's very interesting, and I think it's a good segue to the panel we just had before. I've been very active in the Act 2022 community and have seen that evolution and that growth in Puerto Rico through investment. And as soon as I saw the Opportunity Zone legislation that was approved federally and eventually included Puerto Rico in its original designation, I jumped and said, this is the next big thing, so my business needs to understand this and shift towards this because I saw such a great possibility in the law. That evolved into actually us forming, and me and my partner formed one of the very first Opportunity Zone funds in Puerto Rico, even prior to Puerto Rico having its own legislation, just following the federal legislation. And it basically ran to acquire assets under that fund and raise capital. Again, because I saw the great opportunity here. So with that, Maria and I actually have shared a lot of information regarding this and studied this from the very beginning, have joined together in some panels discussing opportunity zones and what it could mean for Puerto Rico, and how local legislation had to conform to the federal legislation and potentially more. So I think with that, Maria, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about it.
Thank you, Giovanni. Good morning to all, and thank you all for being here today. As I share Giovanni's insight and passion regarding the topic. First, I'm María de Los Ángeles Rivera, tax partner in Kevin Grant Thornton, and also the International Business Center Director for Grant Thornton in Puerto Rico. And for the last probably couple of years have immersed in everything opportunity zones and how we believe and why we believe it's a great opportunity. And again, we use the same term because we have looked for another word and there is no other word for opportunity. So it's a great opportunity for Puerto Rico to showcase in the OC environment as the better jurisdiction out of the 8,700 zones that had been designated as the number one jurisdiction to invest and take opportunity and advantage of this program.
Great. So one of our panelists had identified of several projects, Adrián. So that's very important because when I get calls from prospects or initial clients, they also ask, what can I invest in? And that's a component. We can have these laws, but if we don't know where we're going, so can you tell us about that process, about identifying those projects, how it was, and everything? And tell us about yourself.
Absolutely, Giovanni. Thank you so much. And first of all, let me say thank you to Ricky and the organizers of this conference. Congratulations on the fantastic agenda that you had. And thank you all of you for coming. My name is Adrián Franco. I'm Director of Community Development Finance at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And first of all, I need to say that these are my words and do not represent the opinions of the Federal Reserve or the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. That's my disclaimer. But why the Federal Reserve is in opportunity zones, I think is the first question that a lot of people might have. We do not oversee the regulation. We don't do fiscal policy, as you know. We also are not part of the interagency council coordinated by HUD. But we care about community development, we care about economic development across the nation as part of our mandate. And the Federal Reserve is always paying very close attention to any opportunity, again using the word, that might come to bring more capital to underserved communities. And that is the role that my team has in New York. In particular, that is the district that oversees Puerto Rico. So opportunity zones, when it comes out, we believe it was a very interesting, very important development, but we also were concerned about the lack of reporting requirements and specifics about the importance of engaging community stakeholders in this process. We believe at the Federal Reserve that it's essential, it's critical that if you're going to invest in opportunity zones, that you understand the needs of that particular community and the opportunities that might have. It's just better for investment purposes to be immediately able to identify those needs and contact and work together with the local stakeholders. And here Puerto Rico is a very interesting case. So pretty much the whole island is an opportunity zone. There's a lot of needs. So for us, it was important to start identifying projects and community organizations that have specific projects that will respond to the immediate needs of that community, of those neighborhoods, of those cities. So in the last 2 years, specifically since Hurricane Maria, we have been working very closely with stakeholders here in the island, mainly community organizations, some of the largest ones, but also cooperativas and other intermediaries that could identify those projects that will make a difference in categories that goes from affordable housing to small businesses to renewable energy, obviously workforce development, education, health, etc. So now we have 30 projects that we have identified that went through a process at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York that specifically has a value added, and they are all eligible for CRA credit, Community Reinvestment Act credit. For those not familiar with this legislation, the Community Reinvestment Act essentially asks banks to give back to the communities where they capture deposits. The fact that these are all eligible projects for CRA credit will allow bankers to consider many of those projects for financing, for investment. So it gives any investor the possibility of working with a bank as well as an incentive. So I can talk more about that. I don't want to spend too much time talking about the specific projects, but what I can say is, we are, the Federal Reserve is really interested in this topic because we believe it's important to identify those community needs, respond to the most important aspects, and then find ways that projects are ready, that investors are able to invest in those projects.
Thank you. So Francisco, one thing that I thought, at least when we saw this, is that first of all, this is naturally real estate is the first thing that would come to mind, right? Although we're going to talk about how this is beyond real estate. But the other thing is that a project that wasn't good before opportunity zones isn't magically good now that we have this opportunity zone legislation and these incentives. So can you tell us a little bit about real estate and about identifying these projects and what factors come in?
Sure. First, thanks Ricky for inviting us to this. My name is Francisco de Armas, like says Caribbean Investment and Acquisition. We also have a small private equity fund called CIA Consortium, and we basically got caught up in the OC opportunity, and what we think is a great opportunity also, because what we do, we manage and we service a large portfolio of loans that we acquire, and we co-invest with a large private equity fund from the US. So we've done that for 6-7 years. We've looked at every industry here in Puerto Rico. We have exposure to every industry here in Puerto Rico, not only real estate. We also manage real estate here in Puerto Rico, office, retail, residential. We have over 500,000 square feet right now. So we not only service, we also manage. And when we at the beginning saw this federal law, which is the first thing that caught our, two things caught our attention. You do the private equity fund, the Act 185, which is now on the Act 60, and you have private equity funds in Puerto Rico. It's mostly for local capital, so you raise capital here. When you go outside, it's not that necessarily attractive. Suddenly, this federal law is capital gains in the US that can be transferred to Puerto Rico and get the exemption, get the deferral, get everything. So that was very interesting. Second thing is that the whole island is an opportunity zone. So that created a whole set of circumstances that are different and really opened up our eyes to say, okay, let's look into this a little bit more. And then we realized that this is a little bit different from the typical private equity fund. You go out, you raise capital, you do subscription, it's there, you do the capital call, you invest in whatever, the profile of whatever you do. Here, you have to have some pipeline first before going out and getting the capital. So we saw this in the US a lot, people, going for, running for the gates and creating the funds. There was actually no pipeline on the other end, and you have the 180 days rule. So it was like, hold on, guys. And then we also saw over there, and this is from people that we talked to, that when you have an opportunity zone that is here and then you put something here, creates a little bit of market speculation. People started buying stuff and just holding on until the prices increase. In Puerto Rico, we don't have that problem. If you buy something right next to where I want to invest, maybe I'll find something a half a mile, farther away, and it'll be the same, and it will have the same, returns. Now, that to answer your question, that's exactly what we think we have. We saw that based on our experience of what we've done over the past 7 to 10 years, is that we know, at least we think we know, that we can identify those opportunities that will not become, that are not good because of the opportunity zone, they're good in themselves. Yeah. And this capital can come in and take a look at it and get the added tax benefit. And certainly, as far as I've seen, so far, as far as I've seen other opportunities and other people that I've talked to in the U.S., which has been running and people are being very active. There's some a lot of millions of dollars being very invested in opportunity zones. I'm not seeing the IRRs, unlevered IRRs. Without that, with that you can do magic. But without that, unlevered IRRs, at least at the 2 or 3 that we have identified that we would like to, we're in the pre-launch mode of our opportunity zone fund. I haven't seen that. So that's how you, experience is basically looking at a whole bunch of different industries, not only real estate. I think the opportunity zones can do a lot of in industrial, infrastructure certainly, energy, no doubt about it, agriculture even, a lot of export, and there's going to be capital that is going to be available that previously, let's say for example, the government of Puerto Rico provided it through PRITCO and other sources, and now it might be available in this opportunity zone funds.
Giovanni, if I may, to your question about the project has to be a good project, before I always do the comparison with a cupcake. That's trademark. A cupcake, your business or your deal is your cupcake, and then it has to be a good cupcake, and then you put frosting on it. And in Puerto Rico, that's the incentive programs. But the cupcake has to be a good cupcake. The frosting on the cake will be the incentives, and then the cherry on the top is the opportunity zone program. But your business, the biggest part of the cupcake has to be good.
Yeah, no, I agree with that absolutely, as you know, and I also agree with a lot of what you said. I saw that at the beginning as well, purchasing for speculation, and people kind of just looking at this idea and putting funds together, and or thinking they were putting funds together, because I'd like to go into that as well. There's a process into that, and I'll go into that next round. But the pipeline is so important, and having the whole island here. So talking about pipeline, and we talked a little bit about real estate. Can you tell us a little bit about non-real estate projects, or about pipeline, what you're seeing, what you're planning to do as well?
So, is this on? Yes. First of all, I'm José Torres. I founded Monllor Capital Partners last year. I spent the last 35 years stateside. I was born in Ponce, Puerto Rico, but after going to school, I spent the last 25 years in private equity and renewable energy in the U.S. I came back to Puerto Rico for both personal reasons and also because I wanted to come back and finish the work that I started for my private equity firm in the U.S. Many times you see investors in the U.S. that have the opportunity to look across not only the U.S. but also globally. Many of those investors, after they saw what happened with the economy in Puerto Rico, with the earthquakes recently, with the hurricanes, they decide that they do not want to continue looking at Puerto Rico as an alternative. They would like to wait until the fiscal problems in Puerto Rico go away, until there is resiliency in Puerto Rico before they come and invest. My goal to come back here was to focus only on Puerto Rico and look at the best alternatives to invest in Puerto Rico that could achieve resiliency, that could achieve a stronger economy, so that all of those investors that are sitting on the sidelines will then come back to Puerto Rico. When I looked at opportunity zones, I really spent most of the time making sure that we can use this outside of real estate investments. Obviously, the regulations that only recently came out from the U.S. Treasury in December gives enough clarity to that. But Puerto Rico has a lot of needs. Most of it is not just real estate. We have a problem with the energy sector. We have a problem with infrastructure. So finding a way to lever the opportunity zone legislation to really address those issues is a way to lever and be able to change or help the economy, which is one of the key issues, and also help solve the credit rating of Puerto Rico. So our goal really is to try to get that capital, that is long-term capital, that is looking in many ways to do impact investment. There's no better place to do it than Puerto Rico. And the fact that all of the island qualifies, that means that renewable energy projects, that means that infrastructure projects, that means that operating business can also be an opportunity zone investment. But not every opportunity zone investment, not every opportunity should be an opportunity zone investment. Even if it qualifies, you really need to look at the drivers of why people are investing in opportunity zones and try to make sure that the pipeline that you're putting together is really addressing the needs of the investor. So the goal is to partner that investor with the right project.
Great, thank you. Well, Adrian kind of mentioned this a little bit on lack of regulation at the beginning. Were you going to add something to that?
If I may.
Yeah.
So to follow up, but also I love the cupcake. So I will just add that it's very important to the point that not every single great opportunity is a great opportunity for opportunity zones. Is that the legislation, the spirit of the legislation is to address the needs of lower income communities and to help underserved communities. So for the cupcake, I will say the ingredients have to be locally sourced, and we should ask the locals what flavor they like. Because if not, you have great projects, and this might bring economic development in the long term, but the opportunity zone specifically is asking to bring jobs. That was the reason that that this legislation was created, and a lot of us are here, is because we believe that these particular needs need to be addressed, and it has to be part of the investment thesis.
Yeah. So I was going to talk about a little bit about regulation. You mentioned there was lack of that in the beginning, but locally we have our own project, and it's an additional law, and rules just came out. So Maria, can you tell us a little bit about that? And then maybe Francisco, can you give us a follow-up? Because I think a lot of people missed from this legislation that this is a fund and that there's regulation that's beyond tax that applies to this, and probably you have the experience and can tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, great. As Giovanni mentioned at the beginning, this is federal legislation. It was incorporated in the federal tax reform back in December 2017. Two small sections of the law were addressing the opportunity zones. The opportunity zone program is just basically the U.S. government recognizing the need to invest in these distressed communities, which nobody likes because they're ugly or high crime or a lot of unemployment, etc. And they recognize the need to invest in these areas and are telling the private investors, the private community, listen, I know you have a lot of capital gains accumulated that you don't generate because probably you don't want to pay taxes. I have a deal for you. generate those gains, elect to invest all part of that gain in these communities that I designated. And if you follow my rules, which, there are a lot of rules to follow, I'll give you some benefits. And the benefits are deferral of the gain and exclusion of the gain, which for a lot of investors is very attractive. So, as I mentioned, there are a lot of rules to meet in order to be able to benefit from this program. Puerto Rico ended up being included in the program, and right now, of the 8,700 opportunity zones designated in the whole nation, we have close to 900 of those zones. So we have close to 10% of all the zones nationwide in Puerto Rico, with the advantage that unless you're planning to build something in the sea, you're not running the risk of going out of the opportunity zone, which is very important in the program. So we have a really exclusive situation, when compared to other jurisdictions. As you mentioned, this is federal. We needed legislation at the local level, conforming legislation. Because why? Puerto Rico residents, as has been mentioned before, we are not subject to U.S. tax on capital gains. So that U.S. rule was not good for us. And if we wanted to invest in Puerto Rico and do something on those opportunity zones, there was no advantage for us. So locally, last year, finally in May 14, 2019, Act 21 was approved for several objectives, but one of those was the conforming law to give the same treatment to capital gains generated in Puerto Rico to be able to attract that investment in those projects. So Act 21 later became part of Act 60, and all these opportunity zones and priority projects and different names they're giving to them are now part of Act 60. So technically, we as local investors have the opportunity also to benefit from this program at the local level. Regulations have been a little bit, slow coming out, but almost a month ago, there was a publication. A first regulation was published, giving some guidance on the investment on this priority project. Of course, we need more, and we're expecting more to come.
Yeah, and so can you talk a little bit about those additional benefits? Because I think we jumped into the opportunity zone subject. And, so
the benefits
of the additional benefits in Puerto Rico.
In Puerto Rico, okay. In addition to the deferral of the capital gain and all that, and as has mentioned before, Puerto Rico has had for many years the incentives programs in Puerto Rico, but still there are some activities which at the beginning of the OC program were kind of the in activities, mostly real estate, that do not have any type of incentives in Puerto Rico. And as part of Act 21, there is a new incentive for projects that do not qualify for any other incentive, manufacturing, tourism, etc. And these are the ones called priority projects. Why priority projects? Because they need to meet certain requirements as stated by the government as their priority. And if you have one of these projects, the incentives, basically it would be an income tax rate of 18.5% on the operating entity, and then distributions from that entity to its investors might be a qualified opportunity fund or private investors pay zero tax. So distributions are free from Puerto Rico tax. Depending on where you live, there might be some additional taxes. Also, there is some tax exemptions for property tax and municipal taxes, but one important factor included for the priority projects, and nowadays that credits have been kind of eliminated for most of the incentive, is that you can get an investment tax credit starting at 5% of the eligible investment that can be negotiated up to 25% of that initial investment. So that adds an additional ingredient to our cupcake because you can monetize some of your investment and decrease probably the need for financing or debt of your project. So that's a very important aspect of the priority projects legislation.
Yeah, I think definitely that's something, that's the cherry. Yeah, so again, back to the regulation, forming a fund. Francisco, you said you're starting to form your fund. Can you tell us about the actual process a little bit, the legal process, the requirements? Because I think that's overlooked a lot here in laws that apply to funds.
Yeah, so the act created, you can have a qualified opportunity zone fund. And very similar to maybe a local private equity fund, the way legally is structured. You're going to have the same elections that you have to make here. You have to make an election in the Treasury Department to be treated as a partnership. You have to make your registration on NOCIF, which is the local regulator. You have to make your exemptions and your filings on the SEC. And then you have the whole set of paperwork which the attorneys take care of. The PPM, the subscription agreement, the investment management agreement, everything else that is in place. And that gives you opportunity for us to go out and raise capital. The recent regulations might create a different structure for our fund because we were thinking of doing an LLC for each investment. Maybe it's a little bit different now, depending on where the investment is going to be and what type of investment it's going to be. And that whole process also gives, we've gone through that obviously, and on our prior funds, and the way we did it differently is this time we said, well, we know how to do this, and we have to go out and raise capital, and that's going to be key to attract that attention of mainland investors, people from the U.S. But again, we go to the cupcake, to the opportunity. And we have already the team to do the underwriting, so we went out and looked for the opportunities and do the underwritings and have that fund in the pre-launch mode basically ready there to when we start talking to interested parties, then we will basically launch it and get our first opportunity going.
Okay, thank you. Because I repeat this. I see it a lot. A lot of these documents you mentioned, like PPMs and whatnot. People would say, "I created a fund." Did you? Did you really create a fund? And the self-certification has to do with that a little bit. You mentioned that there was a lack of regulation. So maybe a general question for the panel.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's very good. The self-certification, obviously, with the IRS, which is very important also, and that's part of the whole process of getting the fund ready.
But it's a trap because people would look at, what do I need to do to set up an OZ fund? Oh, it's just a self-certification, and they would think that that's the only thing they need to do. When you really need to go and look at your securities laws first, and who you're marketing to, and how you're raising funds, and how you're putting this together, and then so yes, it's required, but for the untrained eye, it's.
And one more thing is that the fund level. And you can own properties at the fund level, but there's also the qualified opportunity zone business, which is probably what people think most.
Yep.
You have the qualified opportunity zone business and you have assets there, but there's some technicalities, but basically you have to have 90% of your assets on the fund invested in a qualified opportunity zone business, but then you have 70% only on the business that you have to invest. So you have 30% of your assets in that business that can be invested in anything you want. Doesn't have to be a qualified opportunity zone.
Under a two-tier structure.
Exactly.
Yes.
Unless they cannot have more than 5% in financial assets.
And of course, not cash.
Not cash or
Yeah, no.
shares or stocks.
Yeah, not a hedge fund.
Yeah.
So the general question for the panel was going to be kind of, show me the money, where's the movement, what are we actually seeing? Because this program's, going on 2 years, a little more. Yes, we've been waiting for tiers of regulations, but initially, we wanted to be first to move, or we wanted to see a lot of things happen quickly. They haven't happened as quickly as maybe I personally would have projected. Not necessarily a bad thing, but have you seen something happen, and can you elaborate a little bit on that? Maybe we'll start with Jose.
Yes, there is the side of regulation. The regulation is there. There's some more certainty. But we still have a very big challenge, which is Puerto Rico, its credit rating, the restructuring of the debt. So ultimately, even if we have regulation, even if we have people interested in investing, we still need to address how to work around and structure around what is going on in Puerto Rico today. there are opportunities. I think the best way to approach this is the need. When you're investing on something that is needed, the long term allows you to justify taking some risk up front. So the risk that you need to take is understanding that the asset or the investment you're putting in place today in Puerto Rico is going to withstand changing government, is going to withstand potentially a weak economy, because you're investing on things that are not based on the economy improving. They're actually being done for the economy to improve. So if we put renewable energy that will help reduce the cost of energy, that's something that long term, regardless of Puerto Rico not being investment grade, you should be able to attract that capital. So part of this is not just having a pipeline of investments. Part of this is having the pipeline of investments that can be financed and invested while Puerto Rico is still going through a debt restructuring, while Puerto Rico is still going through probably migration and not growth. So I think that a key aspect is how do we sell Puerto Rico to not only U.S. investors, but to Puerto Rican investors to really deploy that capital. I'm not here, or we shouldn't be here to ask people to generate capital gains just so that they can invest in operating in opportunity zones. We should be asking investors that if you have a capital gain, why give it to the government where you can actually do some impact investment? We should be asking people if you need to diversify from your current investment, whether it's a stock market, and you want to make an impact, this is another opportunity to do that through a tax-efficient way of doing that. So I think it's important how we sell Puerto Rico as a different jurisdiction than investing somewhere else. If you want to have a big impact, there's ways to do it here and ways to do it outside of real estate, where in many other jurisdictions in the U.S. it's going to be very hard to build a renewable energy project, to invest in a business because of all the challenges of not only qualifying, but maintaining that for 10 years. So a lot of businesses, if they expand and get out of the opportunity zone, might not qualify. That's not something that we have to face in Puerto Rico. So I think that's an attractive
I think
things that we have.
there was a quote in there. If there's somebody in the press here, you said, don't invest based on the economy improving, invest so the economy improves. That should be, so whoever's in the press here should definitely quote that. I think it's a really good one.
And I think, just to add to what Jose is saying, part of the job that we have is to educate. And educate outside Puerto Rico and within Puerto Rico about that. About the needs we have here, if you want to make impact, how you can make impact, and at the same time get some benefits from doing that. And I think we have to spread the word. We need to talk about it. And every time we go stateside to talk about it, the first thing people tell us is, why didn't I know about this before? So we need to start the conversation, keep the conversation going on, and spread the needs that we have here. I guess what the Federal Reserve is doing, choosing these projects is going to help that. But I think we need more of that. More people are talking about that.
Adrian, one question, because I saw that you mentioned CRA credits, I believe. At one point, I saw a lot of people thinking about opportunity zones, and they were thinking about CBDG credits at the same time, funds at the same time. And I thought it was a distraction that was losing focus from the OZ program, which is good in itself. I guess you hold a contrary point of view because you brought in another program. Can you tell us a little bit more about how these combine, or how they combine well, and how it's not a distraction from a good program as OC as a standalone?
So it's not a contrary point of view because they are not mutually exclusive. And I think that's one of the key messages that we need to have for investors is, opportunity zones is just one tool in the toolkit. It's not going to be your only source of capital. It's not going to be your only solution. You should be thinking of these deals with different sources. And we thought that one of the possibilities will be to evaluate the eligibility for CRA credit for these projects. But that doesn't mean that you have to look for projects that are also CRA eligible. The CRA the way that this legislation works, it has a particular definition of community development, and so those opportunities, are eligible under that definition, but they're not mutually exclusive. So let me go back to I think what is the main point that we are getting here in this panel, and it's like the importance of education. We had at the Federal Reserve roundtables with many investors as well as leaders in economic development, and that was one of the key takeaways. We need a two-way education on opportunity zones, both with communities and investors. And let me address communities for a second, because I think that's a key issue. We talk to a lot of community organizations, community advocates, local stakeholders, mayors, municipalities here, and there's a lot of skepticism about this legislation, because they have heard before tax credits, and in some cases didn't work that well when what capital left. So we need to educate those communities, and you need to make sure that you involve those voices since the beginning so you won't be in a situation where that investment that you are planning is ongoing, and suddenly you have a very strong voices coming back saying, like, we don't want this building here, or we don't want this business here. You are not helping to address these particular needs. For us, that engagement is essential for any investor interested in opportunity zones. We created a reporting framework that it's online in a website called ozframework.org. ozframework.org is in English and Spanish, and it's very basic guiding principles for investors, as well as some suggested metrics about how to evaluate the impact that you are having in these communities. Because I couldn't agree more with the point that this is for a particular type of investor who is also looking for impact with great benefits. And that is the beauty of this. This is the reason that, in particular, Puerto Rico is an outstanding opportunity. And we also, at the Federal Reserve, keep sharing that with many potential investors. Like, Puerto Rico really, really brings all these aspects together, all these incentives together. But at the end of the day, it's important that since you evaluate these opportunities, you are thinking about the impact in the long term that you can have in the island. And based on a history of crises that include economic crisis, fiscal crisis, political crisis, obviously the natural disasters of the hurricanes, recent earthquakes, is very important to think in the long term of how the island will benefit. And we have great opportunities here for anyone interested in doing that.
Yeah, no, couldn't agree more. So again, a little more, are you seeing more of any type of projects? We saw the government list a few months ago prior to the regulations. Low-income housing, naturally, housing for the elderly, and industrial and commercial. Are we seeing a little more of any of those? Are we seeing things that fall completely outside of the government list? Maybe nudge the government and say, we need to add something else because there's interest?
Well, I want to make a clarification that this government list is for the priority projects legislation. So if you have a project that do not fall within the priority list project, that doesn't mean that you cannot be open for opportunity zones. So the list of 4 that was published is just to qualify for the priority projects, and again, priority under the eyes of the government. And basically nowadays, residential, low-income housing, affordable housing is a high priority for government, so they want to promote that. But at the beginning, as it was the case in the States, what we saw and still seeing more of is real estate deals. Why? Because it's the type of business that is between the lines, and you can start running it. There is not too much doubt, not too much uncertainty on how the regulations apply to real estate. So that was the first go in the States. It was the first go here, and it's still what we are seeing most, acquiring a vacant building or a building that needs to be refurbished, etc. I comply with the substantial improvement test if it's not purchased after, original use after December 31st, 2017. And it's kind of the easy in the sense that it's very clear the regulations that apply. As we mentioned before, opportunity zone is not only for real estate. A great part And a lot of experts in the States are betting that after the rush or the initial impulse of real estate, what is it going to bring more returns and better results for the communities is the investment in businesses, in ongoing businesses. Why this has not happened when we compare with real estate? Because of the uncertainties. There was a lot of doubt on how you measure substantial improvement on an ongoing business. If I always say, well, if before the investment I produce 200 pair of boots and after the investment I produce 1,000 pair of boots, is that substantial improvement? No, nobody knew. So after the second set of proposed regulations that came out, and finally with the final regulations that were issued December, there was a lot of certainty provided in terms of how an ongoing business would qualify to be a qualified opportunity zone business and therefore receive the investments from the funds. So in the States, for example, to my knowledge, there are only 2 funds that are exclusively designed to invest in venture capital. The approach to this investment is venture capital investment. So right now, to my knowledge, maybe there might be 1 or 2 more. There are 2 funds that have been created just to invest in venture capital. So this is starting to get momentum. Maybe it's going to take a little bit more, again, because as venture capital investment, you're looking into the business and probably you invest in 5, hoping that at least 1 or 2, are the good ones. But then still you need to do all your, due diligence and stuff and identify those projects. So personally, I think probably 2020 at the end or 2021, we are going to start seeing a lot of venture business investment in qualified opportunity zone businesses, especially startups are the best.
Yeah, I think it's very easy for startups to start raising. And here in Puerto Rico specifically, if you're a startup in Puerto Rico, you might have all these additional incentives and
right.
It's just easier to raise.
And you mentioned incentive, and again with the CRA credits and all other new markets credits and etc. You can have both the Puerto Rico incentives for your business and have opportunity zone investment. They're not mutually exclusive. That's a question that we get asked all the time. But can I obtain qualified opportunity zone investment even if I have a tax grant? The answer is yes.
Francisco, quick question just to clarify. Is your fund only going to be focused on Puerto Rico investments, or will you also be investing outside of Puerto Rico?
No, Puerto Rico, as of the moment. If anything comes up in the market that we know, we might look at it, but it's going to be Puerto Rico. And just adding to what has been said here, I think, when this act was created, if I understand it correctly, was, depressed areas in the U.S. where they wanted to revitalize those areas, especially in investment in business, and that's why real estate, because when you mention real estate, maybe people think about shopping centers and stuff like that and multifamily. Well, real estate has to do with a whole bunch of other stuff. I mean, if we look at somebody coming into Puerto Rico and establishing a new operation or expanding an operation they have currently, they mostly look to the government to finance that. They went to Pritco, they say, build me a building, I'll pay you rent. Well, there's not going to be any money there. So then Microsoft wants to expand. Okay, you want a new building? You want to, you paid for it, or you want to rent it? Okay, you want to rent it? Maybe a fund of an opportunity zone fund can build it. Let's say student housing. Let's say now this law was passed, or I don't know if it's going to be passed or not, whatever, about the free trade or the international shipping air that is going to be exempt of some regulations in the federal. Will that create a space for new warehousing? And will that be extended over 2 years? That's going to be real estate, because you want to build a warehouse, that's real estate. Now, the big difference with Puerto Rico is that I think at that moment they looked at Puerto Rico and say, you know what, Puerto Rico is depressed. They're bankrupt, hurricane, like the icing on the cupcake, an earthquake. So
not my cupcake. That's not my cupcake.
I know it's not your cupcake. But anyway, what I'm saying is that created a whole set of new opportunities. We do have depressed areas in Puerto Rico. We do have projects that we have to look at the community and say, and there's a need for it, and there's going to be a good impact investment and pretty good returns on them. The fact that we were basically the full island is an opportunity zone then creates other opportunities that are outside maybe the original intention of the act, because not all of Puerto Rico is suppressed, not all of Puerto Rico is considered a marginalized area. There's some very good investment that will create jobs, that will help the economy, that will bring new opportunities, new capital, new people looking at Puerto Rico. So that's when it really gets our attention. We're going to be a Puerto Rico entity. We're here. We manage our assets here. We manage assets for private equity funds in the U.S. And we're going to be investing here on opportunities that we see that there's a need to fulfill, that will be good for the economy. But maybe they're a little bit of outside the original scope of the act.
Giovanni, can I follow up on two of your questions? One, our original fund was going to invest also in the U.S., one as a hedge in case things here did not move as fast. But the new legislation of opportunity zones in Puerto Rico, for Puerto Ricans to be able to invest and take advantage, 100% of the fund has to be committed to Puerto Rico. So there is an incentive or to structure a fund that's investing in Puerto Rico if you want to bring local capital to be a Puerto Rico only opportunity zone fund. I think that's key, because if we're expecting U.S. investors to invest in Puerto Rico and you cannot raise any capital from the local market, that's going to send a signal.
There's a decision-making process when you're evaluating the federal law and the local law. They do conform, but not 100%. So I think a lot of people will have to look at, well, maybe I'm an opportunity zone for federal purposes, but I am well, now it's all Act 60, but I'm going to go under renewable energy or tourism, because those are exclusive in the law. Or for example, what you're mentioning now could be another exclusion. It's not a complete exclusion, it's just that maybe you then don't take advantage of the local benefit. So things that you need to outweigh. But I think one of the things that was mentioned is an impressive part of Puerto Rico that's an opportunity zone is Old San Juan, and maybe off of the top of that cupcake you would think Old San Juan shouldn't be an opportunity zone. But when you actually look at the buildings and the business and what's happening, you see there's a lot of room for growth and a lot of need for growth, and that will trickle down into tourism and other better jobs and whatnot. Because you think Old San Juan is yes, it is beautiful, but it does need a lot of work. So I think that combines very well with what Francisco said.
And my last point, which I wanted to make, is out of the priority projects, I don't believe that waste is one of the issues. And obviously that, for me, is a dear issue in Puerto Rico. There's a bunch of non-compliant landfills. There's a need to address that issue, and I think Opportunity Zone could help that. It's not going to be the only answer, but that's something that I would urge, the government officials to look at, how to incentivize using not just Opportunity Zone, but that's one tool to really address an issue that has not been addressed in Puerto Rico over the years.
That's the first time I heard it, and I think, you
Waste
did that.
and tires.
Well, tires for sure, but yes. That's,
Energy is low hanging.
Yes.
So we have a little bit of time. Are there any questions? No? I think you did a very good job. Seems
Thank
like there's
you.
no questions.
Just mention one thing. A year ago, there was this joke around saying like, who's getting benefited from the Opportunity Zones legislation? Who gets? And it's like the panelists of Opportunity Zones conference. That's no longer the case. There are success stories.
Yes.
There are concrete examples of very good investments in many cities, in many places in the United States that could tell you that this is working.
Yeah.
Look at Baltimore, look at New Jersey, look at Alabama. Alabama is leading the way because they have a lot of agencies working together, finding other incentives, finding other programs to support this legislation, and really attracting a lot of investment. So now we can say, no, there are concrete examples, this is working. Now let's bring those examples to Puerto Rico.
And I think the key there, and we need to learn a lot. And you can find, on Twitter, LinkedIn, you can find groups that talk about this, is to have all the stakeholders in the same table talking about it. Not just the investor on their side deciding, oh, this is the project I'm going to do. Talk to the lawyer, to the mayor, talk to the people, the nonprofits, the NGOs in the area you want to develop the project, and have everybody on board. And that's the secret of most of these cases. Everybody, all the stakeholders are on board, agreeing on the project and the benefits they're gonna get, and that's why the results are there. I think we need to learn a lot about those cases.
And those are the 30 projects that we have identified at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. We invite you to see it on our website. We have all the information there.
Great, perfect. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.